So what we're going to do today is create a new data foundation and business layer in the Business Objects 4.0 information design tool. So we'll start off by creating a new project. So I'll go ahead and call the project, I give this project a name, new video project. Once I create my video project, the first thing that I'll need to do is go ahead and associate some connections with this particular project. I'll do that by right-clicking on one of the existing connections and creating a connection shortcut, associating that with the new video project. Then I'll go ahead and create another connection. So this particular project will have two separate connections. This will be considered a multi-sourced data foundation and business layer and associated universe. Once I've got my shortcut connections available, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new data foundation. So once I'll go ahead and name this data foundation, I typically prefix every data foundation with a DF underscore, just so it's easier to recognize. And then I'll go ahead and provide a description for this data foundation. So this particular data foundation will consist of two DSO objects from SAP BW. And we're going to be looking particularly or specifically at sales order header and sales order items as they relate to SAP. And as that information has been extracted out of SAP into SAP BW and DSOs have been created. So I need to select that this is going to be a multi-sourced data foundation, particularly because these are DSO connections. So I'm going to go ahead and select both of the connections, or the shortcut connections, for this particular data foundation. So I'm going to look at the first connection, which is the sales order header, and I'm going to go ahead and automatically create any of the tables and joins that are associated with the header. The second selection for item, I'll bring that table in by itself. So I want to deselect, in this case, all of the tables and joins that are associated with the item, and I can put those in manually later on. If I choose to pull in all the associated tables and joins with the item table, in this particular case, I would end up with a pretty big spider web that I'd have to go back and fix. So in this case, I'll just bring in the item table manually on its own. So I've clicked Finish, and now extracting the relationships out of SAP BW for this particular DSO. The design tool creates the relationships between the DSO and all of the associated tables, particularly the text field tables that you'll see. So at this point, I'll take a look at my header table, and on the left-hand side, I'll look at all the tables that are available, and then all of the relationships as well. So one thing to note is that when you automatically create the relationships, the information design tool aliases each and every one of the text tables and uses the alias in the relationship instead of the actual table itself. So you'll see all the tables down below, the actual physical tables down below, and you'll see the aliases for those tables up above that are related to the header table or the fact table. I won't go into detail about why it does that, but just as a precursor, just to let you know, that's what happens. So now I actually want to bring in the next layer of that fact, which is the item table. So I'll bring the item table in simply by dragging and dropping it into the data foundation. So I'm going to need to maneuver this table around so that I can create the relationship between the ISO item table and the ISO header table. And this particular relationship between these two tables exists solely on order number. So I'll simply drag and drop the order number from the ISO header to the order number from the ISO item table. And that's a very simple relationship. That's a just an equal to relationship between the order numbers on those two tables. So I'll go ahead and I'll contract the table, ISO item, and then I'll manipulate or kind of maneuver the tables around to get a better visualization of this particular data foundation. Once I've created my data foundation, then I can go ahead and move forward with creating the business layer. But the first thing that I want to do is just validate the relationship that I created between those two tables simply by opening up the actual join itself and then clicking validate to go ahead and validate that relationship. So as we're waiting just a moment for BW to validate this relationship, once we finish, then we'll go ahead and create the business layer for this particular data foundation. So bear with me just a moment or two while this is validating. Okay, so we validated our relationship. We'll go ahead and close out the screen. So you can see that we've incorporated 118 tables from the ISO header and just one from the ISO item data store. All right, I'm going to go ahead and expand my projects, my local projects folder structure on the left-hand side, and go ahead and right-click and then create a new business layer. So this is the business layer from this particular for this particular business layer is going to be a relational connection. I'll go ahead and I'll define what the name of this business layer is going to be. So once again, I prefix the name to be BL underscore, once again for simplicity purposes. Provide a quick business description for this business layer. This particular one, once again, to reiterate, is for sales orders and sales order items. So I'll go ahead and put that description in. Go ahead and click the next button. I'll then select the data foundation in which I want to build this business layer, which is the one we just created. And then I can go ahead and select automatically create classes and objects for BW. So what that will do is it will automatically build out the class structure and the object structure at the business layer for the associated data foundation. So you can see on the left-hand side the business layer that's been built out. So all of the objects for that business layer have been automatically created using the metadata coming directly from SAP BW for this particular DSO. Now I can go through and I can manipulate and change any of the properties for any of these objects that have already been built out. So that originally was called canceled indicator or cancel indicator, and now I'm going to go ahead and call that canceled indicator just to give a example of how you can change object names. Kind of scrolling through, I can see some of my key measures for the header or the number of sales order documents. So that's one of the key measures that's coming directly out of the DSO. So also notice that my ISO, the sales order item is missing, and what I had forgotten to do was I added the table to the data foundation but didn't save the data foundation. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to my data foundation and go ahead and click save, and now you'll recognize down in the bottom right hand corner of the business layer that that table now appears to exist in the business layer. So no need to recreate the business layer, just go ahead and save the data foundation, and that should automatically propagate down to the business layer. So now what I'd like to do is add some fields from this ISO item table into our business layer that we've already created. So I can do this a number of different ways. One way I can do this is to grab the table and drag it up into the business layer itself, and it will automatically create objects based on the columns that are in that particular DSO table. From here I can go and rename once again the folder structure, any of the objects. I can change their names, their descriptions. Like I'm doing now for order number, I'm going to rename that in something a little more verbose than just order num, so I'll name that order number, or rename that order number. If I want to, I can select many objects at the same time. I can cut them out, remove them if I choose not to have them in my business layer. I can change dimensional objects to measure objects. So I'm going to take this one particular object. I'm going to change the data type, and I can wrap some functions around this particular object. So I'll go ahead and first turn this into a measure object, and you can see that the icon to the left has actually changed. And now I'll go ahead and change my data type to a number or to numeric because it is a measure, and just wrap the function sum around it. So now I've manipulated one of the objects, changed the data type, and shown some possibilities around what you can do in the changes to the business layer. So I'll go ahead and save this business layer. This is a very rudimentary pass at quickly creating a data foundation in a business layer. Once I do that, I need to publish my business layer to a repository so that I can use that through one of the end tools, whether it be Web Intelligence or Crystal Reports. So very quickly, when you publish a universe to a repository, you can actually check the integrity of that universe if you choose to. In this case, I will not, for, once again, simplicity purposes. The next step is to select a folder which you want to publish the universe. Click the Finish button, and now we've published the universe.